Tonight we journey through the stranger side of medicine's past, a time when desperate cures were brewed from poisons, bones, and downright bizarre ingredients. Some of these treatments came from ignorance, others from bold experimentation, and while a few accidentally worked, most were recipes for disaster. So settle in as we explore 33 of the oddest medical treatments in history, remedies that remind us just how far medicine has come, and how lucky we are to live in the age of antibiotics instead of arsenic tonics. Before we begin, if you truly enjoy these stories, hitting like and subscribe helps me keep making them, and hopefully helps you keep drifting off. Let me know when and where you're listening from tonight. I'm always amazed by the places people tune in. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath in, and then let it out, because once this story begins, chances are you'll be asleep before it ends. Oddest treatment number 1, arsenic tonics. Imagine walking into a 19th century pharmacy. The shelves are lined with glass bottles, their labels written in ornate script, and tucked between the cough syrups and digestive bitters, you spot something shocking. A tonic proudly advertising one main ingredient, arsenic. Yes, the same poisonous substance we now lock away and label with skull and crossbones was once bottled up and sold as a health drink. Back then, arsenic wasn't just a villain in crime novels, it was marketed as a miracle. People believed arsenic could brighten pale skin, cure anemia, improve appetite, and even boost energy. It was the 19th century equivalent of an energy drink, except instead of sugar and caffeine, it slowly poisoned you. Doctors prescribed Fowler's solution, a famous arsenic tonic, for everything from fever to asthma. It came in little glass bottles, a clear liquid with a faintly metallic taste. Take a few drops, they said, and you'd feel invigorated. And in the short term, some people actually did. Because arsenic in small doses gives a temporary flush to the skin and a rush of energy. It was the ultimate placebo with teeth. Wealthy women used arsenic tonics as part of their beauty routines. They wanted that fashionable pale porcelain look. So they sipped poison by the drop, convinced it would keep their complexion smooth. And for a while it seemed to work. Their skin glowed, right up until the nausea, hair loss, and organ failure set in. Imagine the daily ritual. A young woman in a Victorian parlour lifts a tiny spoonful of arsenic solution to her lips. She swallows, shivers at the metallic taste, and reassures herself that beauty demands sacrifice. She has no idea the sacrifice may be her liver. Arsenic tonics weren't just for women. Men used them as well, claiming the drops improved strength and stamina. Some athletes even trained with arsenic, convinced it gave them an edge. Picture a horse-drawn coach race, where the competitors are all slightly poisoned but feeling very confident about it. The irony, of course, was that arsenic really did work in a twisted way. It sped up the heart. It caused the skin to flush. It gave the illusion of vigour and vitality. So customers swore by it, even as their bodies slowly accumulated the toxic load. The dangers weren't fully recognised until decades later. Doctors began noticing that long-time users developed ulcers, skin cancers, and a distinctive arsenic complexion. And as science advanced, arsenic's true nature was exposed. What was once sold as a cure became infamous as a slow-acting poison. Yet the fascination with arsenic never fully died. Even into the 20th century, traces showed up in cosmetics, powders, and patent medicines. It seemed the temptation of a miracle cure was too strong for people to abandon quickly. It took years of warnings, regulations, and mounting evidence before arsenic tonics finally disappeared from pharmacy shelves. Today the idea seems absurd. Who would willingly drink arsenic for better skin? But in the 19th century it was normal. People trusted labels, believed advertisements, and desperately wanted remedies for their ailments. And if that meant sipping poison in tiny doses, they thought it was worth the risk. So the next time you pick up a modern multivitamin, be grateful. It may not work miracles, but at least it won't quietly rot your insides while convincing you look fabulous. Of course, arsenic wasn't the only poison sold as health. In the early 20th century, another glowing fad swept across pharmacies, literally. It shimmered in the dark, promised eternal youth, and turned out to be even deadlier. Treatment number 2. Radium water. Imagine ordering bottled water at the start of the 20th century. You twist open the cap, take a sip, and it glows in the dark. Congratulations, you've just bought radium water, the miracle drink that promised health, energy, and eternal youth. Radium had only just been discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie. It glowed mysteriously, hummed with invisible energy, and seemed like bottled magic. Doctors and entrepreneurs were quick to jump on the fad. If a little light could shine from this element, surely it could light up the human body too. Enter the radium craze. Companies sold bottles of radium water, promising it would cure arthritis, boost energy, and keep you young forever. The most famous brand, Radithor. It came in elegant little vials and was advertised as a perpetual sunshine you could drink. The marketing was brilliant, the science deadly. At first the effects felt real. A dose of radium water gave people a strange rush. They claimed their aches melted away, their skin felt fresher, their minds sharper, and for a brief moment they believed they had found the fountain of youth. But slowly the poison began to take its toll. The most infamous case was Eben Byers, a wealthy American industrialist. He swore by Radithor, drinking bottle after bottle. He loved it so much he reportedly told friends, "It made me a new man." Unfortunately, it soon made him a dead man. The radium slowly ate away his bones, disfiguring his jaw in gruesome ways before finally killing him. His death made headlines, and suddenly people weren't so eager to sip glowing water anymore. Yet for years the craze continued. Radium wasn't just in water, it was baked into chocolates, mixed into toothpaste, even painted onto watch dials. The glowing hands of a wristwatch at night looked magical. The poor factory workers who painted them, the radium girl, paid the price, their health destroyed by the very substance they handled daily. Imagine a fancy dinner party in the 1920s. Glasses clink. Guests laugh, sipping their sparkling radium cocktails. Their teeth gleam a little brighter, their lips curl into confident smiles. No one realizes they're essentially toasting with radioactive waste. The glow wasn't just from the glass, it was from their own misplaced optimism. The strange thing is, people weren't entirely wrong about radium. In carefully controlled medical settings, radiation can kill cancer cells and save lives. But back then, there was no careful dosing, just blind faith. A little glow was good, so a lot must be better. And so entire shelves of glowing cures popped up, promising energy but delivering tragedy. Eventually science caught up. Doctors documented horrifying cases of bone decay, organ failure, and cancer linked to radium tonics. The glowing miracle turned into a glowing warning. By the 1930s, regulations finally banned radium water, but not before thousands had already sipped their way into illness. Today, radium water has become a dark joke in medical history. The bottles are collector's items, reminders of a time when glowing liquid seemed like bottled youth. They sit on shelves in museums, glowing faintly, whispering stories of misplaced trust. So the next time you reach for bottled water, be grateful it doesn't light up your nightstand. Clear, boring water may not promise eternal youth, but at least it won't slowly dissolve your jaw. And if drinking radioactive water sounds bizarre, wait until you hear what people did with actual mummies. Because for centuries they ground them up, bottled the dust and sold it as medicine. Treatment number 3. Mummy powder. Picture this, it's the 16th century. You walk into a European apothecary, expecting herbs, spices, maybe some powders, and instead, the pharmacist offers you something straight out of a tomb. Ground up Egyptian mummy, bottled and sold as medicine. Yes, actual mummies. The preserved bodies of ancient Egyptians were shipped across the Mediterranean, unwrapped and pulverized into dust. That dust was then sold to cure everything from headaches to stomach pain, bruises to internal bleeding. The logic? Mummies had survived for centuries without rotting. Surely their dried flesh must hold the power of preservation and healing. The practice became wildly popular. Kings, nobles, and everyday citizens all reached for mumia as a miracle cure. It was sprinkled in wine, stirred into water, or even applied directly to wounds. If you scraped your knee, someone might rub mummy dust on it and say, "There, now you're practically immortal." Of course, the supply of genuine mummies couldn't keep up with demand. Enter the fakers. Merchants began digging up recently buried bodies, drying them out and selling them as fresh mummy. It was a black market of counterfeit corpses, so not only were you eating the dead, you might not even get a proper pharaoh for your money. Imagine a lavish dinner in the 17th century France. The table groans with roasted meats and fine wine. At the end, the host passes around a little dish of powdered mummy for guests to sprinkle into their cups. They sip with a toast, confident they're adding health and longevity to their evening. Meanwhile, the guest of honor is spinning in his sarcophagus halfway across the world. Artists even used mummy powder as pigment. Egyptian brown was a rich paint colour made by grinding mummies into paste. Painters worked under its earthy tones while quietly admitting that their palette smelled a bit suspicious. When some artists later discovered the truth, they buried their paint tubes out of guilt. But for centuries, people didn't blink. If your doctor prescribed mummy powder, you took it, and when it seemed to help, likely thanks to placebo or contamination with natural resins, you praised its powers. No one questioned whether consuming the ancient dead was perhaps a little strange. Eventually the fad faded. By the 18th century, physicians began to doubt the wisdom of cannibal medicine. Scientific advances showed no evidence that mummy dust cured anything, and public disgust grew as people realized what they'd been swallowing. By the 19th century, the trade dwindled, though collectors still prized whole mummies for display. Today, it sounds macabre. The idea of snorting, sipping, or painting with bits of a 3,000-year-old Egyptian noble feels more like horror than healing. But in its time, mummy powder was mainstream medicine. It was the aspirin of its day, just a little crunchier. So next time you reach for a painkiller, be grateful it comes from a pharmacy and not a pyramid. Your headache relief no longer requires grave robbing. And if mummy powder sounds bizarre, just wait until you hear about mercury, because for centuries doctors prescribed it not as a poison, but as a cure. Treatment number 4, mercury cures. If you've ever held a thermometer and watched the silvery liquid inside, you've seen mercury. It looks mysterious, smooth, reflective, like liquid metal from another world. And for centuries people thought it wasn't just fascinating, they thought it was medicine. Mercury was prescribed for everything from constipation to melancholy, but its most infamous use was in treating syphilis. Doctors believed rubbing mercury ointment onto the skin, or even swallowing it, could purge the disease. Their motto was grim: a night in the arms of Venus leads to a lifetime on Mercury. The treatment was brutal. Patients sweated under heavy blankets after being slathered in mercury, inhaling its vapours until their teeth loosened and their hair fell out. Some were given mercury pills that rotted their insides faster than the illness itself. Yes, syphilis was terrible, but the cure often killed you quicker. And yet mercury had a strange allure. Its shimmering appearance made it feel magical, alchemical. Physicians saw it as a metal with lifelike properties, able to flow and shift like water, yet remain heavy and indestructible. Surely something that strange had to hold power over disease. Imagine being a patient in the 16th century. You stumble into a dimly lit room, weak from illness. The physician approaches with a jar of shimmering silver ointment. "Good news," he says. "We'll just rub this on you until you drool non-stop." You nod, because what else can you do? Medicine was trust, and mercury was the doctor's best shot. The results were devastating. Chronic mercury poisoning led to tremors, ulcers, organ failure, and insanity. Some patients shook so violently they couldn't feed themselves. Others suffered jawbone decay, leaving gaping wounds. The supposed cure was often worse than the disease, yet it remained in use for centuries. Even outside of syphilis, mercury popped up everywhere. It was used in teething powders for infants, laxatives for the constipated, and tonics for the melancholy. Yes, people actually dosed babies with mercury. It soothed the gums, right up until it poisoned their tiny bodies. And yet, mercury had staying power, because sometimes it did seem to help, at least in the short term. It killed bacteria, reduced inflammation, and made patients feel as though something powerful was happening. But the long-term cost was horrific. Eventually, as medical science advanced, mercury's dangers became undeniable. Doctors documented generations of poisoned patients. By the 20th century, safer antibiotics finally replaced it. Mercury drifted back to the laboratory where it belonged, instead of the medicine cabinet. Today we handle mercury with gloves and warnings. The idea of swallowing it for health sounds absurd, but for centuries it was one of the most trusted treatments around. Proof that desperation and hope can make even poison taste like a cure. And if you thought smearing yourself with mercury was extreme, just wait. Because the next cure involved drilling a hole directly into your skull. Treatment number 5. Trepanation. Headache? Seizure? Feeling a little moody? For thousands of years, the solution was simple. Cut a hole in your skull and let the bad stuff out. This was trepanation, one of the oldest surgical procedures in human history. Archaeologists have found skulls from as far back as 7,000 years ago. with neat little circles carved into them. Some patients even survived, their bone healing around the gap, which means they lived on, slightly holier than before. The idea was that illness, madness, or pain came from evil spirits trapped in the head, so doctors, or more often local healers, use sharp stones or primitive drills to carve an exit door. If the demon caused migraines, maybe it would just fly right out. Imagine lying on a wooden table in the Middle Ages. No anesthesia, no antiseptic. Just a group of men holding you down while another scrapes into your skull. The sound of bone grinding fills the air. The healer mutters prayers while you pray harder, and at the end, you're sent home with a bandaged head and hopefully fewer demons. Sometimes trepanation was used for head injuries. If someone fractured their skull in battle, healers drilled to relieve pressure and drain blood. In rare cases, this actually saved lives, but more often it just added another hole to an already battered soldier. The practice wasn't limited to Europe. From South America to Africa, trepanation popped up in cultures worldwide. In Peru, Incan healers performed skull surgeries with surprisingly high survival rates. Some patients lived for years afterward. Meanwhile, in Europe, survival often depended on luck, a strong constitution, and a tolerance for amateur carpentry on your head. By the Renaissance, trepanation became more professional. Doctors designed specialized drills called trepans. They looked like corkscrews or hand-cranked egg beaters, only aimed at your skull. Physicians proudly collected skulls showing neat little circles, proof of their surgical skill, though whether their patients were equally proud is debatable. The symbolism of the hole went beyond medicine. Some cultures believed it opened the mind to spiritual visions. A hole in the head wasn't just for demons, it was a gateway for enlightenment. Imagine explaining to your family, hey, no, it's not madness, it's spiritual Wi-Fi. Even in modern times, a few eccentric thinkers have revived trepanation as a way to expand consciousness. In the 1960s, there were even underground manuals describing how to drill your own skull at home. Yes, people actually tried DIY brain holes in the name of enlightenment. Spoiler, it didn't go well. Today, trepanation has been replaced by real neurosurgery and performed with sterile tools and actual anesthesia. But the legacy remains. Humanity's long history of trying to solve problems by quite literally letting off steam. So the next time you get a headache, be thankful for aspirin, 'cause your ancestors, they reached straight for the drill. And if that sounds bad, wait until you hear what doctors once did with tobacco. Not smoked, not chewed, blown directly into your body in the strangest way imaginable. Treatment number 6, tobacco smoke enemas. Yes, you heard that correctly. There was a time when doctors genuinely believed blowing smoke up someone's backside could save their life, and they weren't being sarcastic. This was the tobacco smoke enema, one of history's strangest cures. It started in the 18th century, mostly around rivers. When someone drowned, rescuers rushed to revive them. They tried pressing on the chest, warming the body, and oddly enough, piping tobacco smoke into the rectum. The idea was that the warmth and stimulation might restart breathing. In other words, smoke as CPR. Imagine the scene. A poor fisherman is dragged from the Thames, limp and dripping. Bystanders gather as a doctor kneels with a bellows pipe, and instead of chest compressions, the crowd cheers as smoke billows from beneath the blanket. The patient may or may not survive, but the audience definitely leaves with a story. Medical societies even installed smoke enema kits along riverbanks, like early defibrillators. You could run for help, grab the device and get pumping. Instead of electricity to shock the heart, you had nicotine to jolt the intestines. Same urgency, very different method. But smoke enemas weren't just for the drowned. Doctors prescribed them for colds, headaches and even cholera. Feeling weak? A little tobacco puff might perk you right up. And at the time, people believed tobacco was practically a wonder drug, stimulating, cleansing, even sacred. Of course, reality was less kind. Nicotine absorbed through the rectum was powerful and dangerous. Patients sometimes grew dizzy, nauseous, or collapsed altogether, which meant the cure for near death could push you the rest of the way. The phrase blowing smoke eventually became a metaphor for nonsense, because, well, you can imagine why. The practice faded in the 19th century as science advanced and CPR became, thankfully, more chest-focused. Tobacco smoke remained popular, just not in that particular direction. Still, the image lingers. A riverside rescue, a crowd holding its breath, and a doctor pumping smoke where the sun doesn't shine. Sounds like satire, but for over a century it was serious medicine. So next time someone accuses you of blowing smoke, you can remind them, at least you're not doing it Victorian style. And if you thought smoke in strange places was bad, wait until you hear about what people put on their skin. Because the next odd remedy involved cosmetics laced with deadly lead. Treatment number 7. Lead makeup and elixirs. Beauty has always come with a price. But in the Renaissance and well into the 18th century, the price of beauty was often lead poisoning. Fashionable men and women longed for pale porcelain skin. It signalled wealth, nobility, and the luxury of staying indoors instead of toiling in the fields. And the quickest way to achieve that glow? A thick coat of lead-based face powder. Known as Venetian ceruse, this cosmetic was made from white lead. It went on smooth, covering blemishes and scars. The result was an elegant, ghostly complexion. The side effect was that it slowly ate away the skin beneath. Imagine a noble woman preparing for a banquet. Her maid carefully applies layer after layer of the powder. Her cheeks shine pale under candlelight, flawless and radiant. But under the fake-up, her skin is blistering, cracking, and absorbing poison with every breath. Doctors even recommended small doses of lead in tonics. Drinking it was supposed to strengthen the body. Instead, it damaged nerves, rotted gums, and blackened teeth. One can only imagine the irony. Glowing skin paired with a jaw that barely held together. The obsession ran deep. Elizabeth I of England famously wore heavy lead makeup to hide scars from smallpox. Her courtiers copied her style, creating a whole court of chalky, shimmering faces. It was the original influencer trend, except the influencer was slowly being poisoned. Lead also crept into other beauty products. Rouges, lip colours, even hair powders contained it. And while people whispered about strange illnesses afflicting the fashionable, the allure of the perfect complexion was too strong to resist. Some even argued that lead preserved youth. After all, it covered wrinkles and gave the illusion of smoothness. The fact that it also caused paralysis and death. A minor detail in the pursuit of beauty. Eventually science caught up. Doctors realized that the very makeup promising vitality was destroying lives. By the 19th century, whispers of danger turned into loud warnings, and gradually lead powder fell out of favour, though not before leaving centuries of damage behind. Today we laugh at the idea of smearing poison across our faces, yet the desire for instant beauty still drives industries to push risky products. Lead powder may be gone, but the lesson remains. Sometimes the glow just isn't worth the risk. And if smearing poison on your cheek sounds bad, wait until you hear what doctors did with your blood. Because for centuries the go-to cure for almost everything was simply draining it out. Treatment number 8. Bloodletting and leeches. For most of history, if you were sick, there was one universal cure. No matter if it was a fever, a cough, a headache, or heartbreak, your doctor reached for the lancet. The solution was simple: drain your blood until you felt better, or at least too dizzy to complain. The theory went back to the ancient Greeks. They believed the body was governed by 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you got sick, it meant your humours were out of balance. And the fastest way to fix that? Take out some blood and hope the rest sorted itself out. Bloodletting became the Swiss Army knife of medicine. Smallpox? Cut a vein. Pneumonia? Cut a vein? Stubbed your toe? Well, better safe than sorry. Cut a vein. Sometimes doctors used knives. Other times they used leeches. Picture a row of slimy little worms clinging to your skin like living syringes. Each one could drink several times its weight in blood, and when they fell off, doctors proudly collected them, ready to redeploy their medical staff on the next patient. Leeches became so popular that in the 19th century Europe nearly ran out. Apothecaries ordered them by the thousands. Whole ponds were drained of leeches to meet demand. It was less medicine and more blood donation drive unwilling addition. The practice wasn't limited to common folk. Kings, popes, and nobles were all bled. George Washington himself died after doctors drained nearly half his blood in a desperate attempt to cure a throat infection. The cure literally killed him faster than the disease, and yet people swore by it. After a good bleeding, patients often felt lightheaded and weak, which doctors took as proof the treatment was working. In reality, that was just anemia saying hello. Bloodletting rituals could be elaborate. Doctors had charts showing which veins to open for which ailments. Headache? Open the forehead vein. Liver trouble? Try the arm. Mood swings? Maybe both arms, just to be safe. By the 19th century, cracks began to show. Science started asking awkward questions like, does losing blood actually help? The answer was no, but traditions die hard, and it took decades before the lancet and leech finally lost their place in every doctor's bag. Today, bloodletting survives only in rare modern therapies, where leeches are used to restore circulation after surgery. But that's a far cry from the days when half the population was walking around lightheaded, because their doctor thought dizziness equaled health. So next time you get a cold, be grateful your doctor recommends rest and fluids instead of bringing out a bucket and a worm farm. And if draining your veins wasn't enough, some treatments went even further, because the next odd remedy wasn't about taking fluids out. It was about putting them back in, urine to be exact. Treatment number 9. Urine therapy. If you've ever thought modern wellness fads were strange, wait until you hear about this one. For centuries, people believed that the cure to many ailments was sitting inside their own bodies all along. Yes, urine. Drinking it, washing with it, even gargling it. This was urine therapy. The practice dates back to ancient civilizations. In India, it was called shivambu, described in some Ayurvedic texts as a way to cleanse the body and spirit. Romans reportedly used urine as a mouthwash, claiming it whitened teeth, and medieval Europeans bottled their own, convinced it cured everything from sore throats to infections. Imagine waking up in the Middle Ages with a cough. You shuffle to the kitchen, pour yourself a cup. Not of water, not of wine, but of last night's homebrew. You take a sip, grimace, and tell yourself, well, at least it's organic. Urine wasn't just drunk. It was used in poultices for wounds. It was rubbed on the skin to treat acne. Some physicians even recommended bathing in it for full-body rejuvenation, because nothing says spa day quite like a golden soak. Part of the reasoning was practical. Urine is sterile when it leaves the body. It contains salts, urea, and water. So in desperate times, people saw it as a built-in medicine cabinet. Unfortunately, sterile doesn't mean healthy. Drinking it long-term can do more harm than good. Yet believers swore it worked. In the 17th century, an Englishman named Thomas Willis recommended children with convulsions drink their parents' urine. Soldiers on battlefields sometimes used it to clean wounds when nothing else was available, and sailors adrift at sea occasionally resorted to it when fresh water ran out. For them, it wasn't superstition, it was survival. But in calmer times, urine therapy became a wellness trend. Pamphlets promised it cured everything from asthma to baldness. If your hair was thinning, just rub a little in, they said. If your skin was dull, wash your face with it. It was the original DIY skincare routine, cheap, renewable, and utterly baffling. Imagine a noblewoman at her vanity. Beside her powders and perfumes sits a delicate vial of amber liquid. She dips a cloth, pats her cheeks, and smiles, convinced she's discovered the secret to youth. Her maid nods politely, silently vowing never to borrow her mistress's towels again. The trend never completely died. Even in the 20th century, fringe wellness movements revived urine therapy. Books and clubs sprung up, praising it as nature's medicine. Some still swear by it today, though science rolls its eyes and recommends literally anything else. Modern doctors agree. Urine isn't toxic in small amounts, but it's not a miracle cure. At best, it's harmless. At worst, it concentrates waste your body was smart enough to get rid of. Drinking it for health is like taking out the trash, then bringing it back inside for dinner. So the next time you hear about a questionable detox, remember this. At least it doesn't involve collecting your own sample jars. And if sipping urine sounds unsettling, just wait. Because the next cure involved eating something even more shocking. Actual human flesh. Treatment number 10. Cannibal medicine. Yes, this one is exactly what it sounds like. For centuries, Europeans believed that the best medicine for your body was other people's bodies. Welcome to the world of cannibal medicine. It wasn't framed as cannibalism, of course. Doctors called it mumia, corpse medicine, or simply remedies from the body. But the idea was the same. If the human body held life force, then consuming parts of it might transfer that vitality. Powdered skull was believed to cure migraines. Human fat collected from executed criminals was used as a salve for joint pain. Fresh blood, still warm, was thought to restore energy and treat epilepsy. Apothecaries stocked jars of these ingredients like they were common herbs. Picture a 17th century pharmacy. On one shelf dried rosemary and lavender, on another a bowl of powdered skull. A customer strolls in, rubs his temples and says, "Headache again, give me a pinch of cranium please." The pharmacist nods, as if this is the most normal request in the world. Kings and nobles weren't above it either. Charles II of England supposedly drank a tonic called the King's Drops, made with distilled human skull. The wealthy swore by these remedies, convinced they were absorbing not just healing, but strength, vitality, even courage. Execution sites became pharmacies in their own right. Crowds sometimes rushed to collect fresh blood from the scaffold, handing cups to epileptics who gulped it down, hoping the life force would calm their convulsions. It was equal parts medicine, ritual, and horror show. Artists joined in too. Human fat was mixed into paints and salves, used not only for healing but also in folk magic. It blurred the line between science, superstition, and sheer desperation. And yet people swore it worked. If your pain eased after rubbing on mummy fat, you praised the medicine. If your headache dulled after a dose of powdered skull, you told your friends. Placebo, coincidence, or simply wishful thinking, it didn't matter. The cure was believed to have worked, and belief was half the battle. By the 18th century, cannibal medicine began to lose popularity. Enlightenment thinkers raised eyebrows, and science advanced beyond corpse-based cures. But whispers of it persisted in folk remedies long after it was officially abandoned. Today it feels shocking. We imagine cannibalism as barbaric, the stuff of horror films, yet for centuries it was practiced in the finest courts and pharmacies of Europe. Proof that desperation for healing can make even the unthinkable seem reasonable. So the next time you pop an aspirin, be grateful. Your pain relief no longer depends on a sprinkle of powdered king. And if chewing on skull dust wasn't strange enough, the next treatment takes us even lower. Because doctors once swore by poultices made of animal dung. Treatment number 11. Animal dung poultices. When you think of medicine, you probably picture herbs, syrups, or maybe a soothing tea. What you probably don't picture is a fistful of animal droppings smeared across your skin, and yet for centuries dung poultices were a common cure. Cow dung, pig dung, even crocodile dung, all were applied to wounds, rashes, and infections. The logic was simple. Nature provided everything. If it came out of an animal, maybe it carried healing properties, and besides it was cheap, plentiful, and warm. In ancient Egypt, crocodile dung was sometimes mixed with honey and applied as a contraceptive. That's right. Someone thought the path to family planning was through a reptile's leftovers. And while honey has antibacterial properties, the crocodile dung was, shall we say, less helpful. In Europe, cow dung was rubbed on wounds. The warmth was believed to draw out infection, while the texture sealed the injury. Unfortunately, it also introduced more bacteria, making things worse. But when your choices were fresh dung or nothing at all, some people figured it was worth a try. Picture a battlefield in the Middle Ages. A soldier staggers in, bleeding from a sword slash. The healer crouches beside him, scoops a handful of animal dung and smears it across the wound. "Don't worry," he says, "this will heal you." The soldier stares, torn between gratitude and the sudden desire to run home. Pig dung had its place too. It was mixed with herbs into poultices for infections. Some folk healers swore it reduced swelling, others swore it simply smelled too bad for demons to come near, which was its own form of protection. Dung wasn't limited to medicine, it sometimes slipped into magic. Witchcraft and folk rituals used it in charms and spells. Because if you're already scooping it up, why not double it as a potion ingredient? Of course, not everyone was convinced. Even in the past, some physicians rolled their eyes, arguing dung was more dangerous than helpful. But in rural villages with little access to trained doctors, it remained a go-to remedy. Better to do something, they thought, than to do nothing. Modern science has looked back and shaken its head. Yes, dung contains bacteria that can stimulate the immune system, but it also carries parasites and disease. Any benefit was drowned out by the risks. In other words, the cure was often worse than the illness. Today, dung therapy is thankfully retired. Although, fun fact, medicine still sometimes uses sterile versions of microbe transfer, just not straight from the barnyard. It's cleaner, safer, and doesn't involve dodging flies. So the next time you complain about bitter cough syrup, remember, your ancestors had to smear cow patties on their wounds. And if you thought dung was a strange prescription, just wait. Because in the early 20th century, doctors told people the real cure for asthma was cigarettes. Treatment number 12. Cigarette asthma cures. Today, smoking is stamped with warning labels and grim photos of diseased lungs. But in the early 20th century, doctors said the exact opposite. They actually prescribed cigarettes as medicine. Asthma was a frustrating, poorly understood condition. Patients struggled with wheezing, coughing, and shortness of breath. Pharmaceutical companies saw an opportunity, so they rolled out medicinal cigarettes, marketed as a way to open the lungs and soothe the throat. These weren't ordinary smokes, at least that's what the ads claimed. They were packed with herbs like stramonium, lobelia, and belladonna, plants with real pharmacological effects, and yes, sometimes plain old tobacco. The instructions were simple: light up, inhale deeply, and let the smoke do its magic. Imagine a Victorian parlour. An asthmatic gentleman wheezes, gasping for breath. Instead of an inhaler, his doctor hands him a pack of asthma relief cigarettes. He lights one, takes a long drag, and the room fills with fragrant smoke. His cough pauses, not because he's cured, but because his lungs are too stunned to keep fighting. The marketing was shameless. Pamphlets promised cigarettes would soothe the throat, expand the lungs, and banish coughs. Some even claimed they were endorsed by physicians. Patients desperate for relief happily puffed away, filling their bedrooms with so-called healing smoke. For a moment it probably felt like it worked. The smoke contained compounds that numbed the throat and relaxed the muscles. Asthmatic spasms eased temporarily. But over time the irritation and damage piled up. The cure was silently making the disease worse. And yet the fad stuck. By the 1920s, multiple brands competed in the medical cigarette market. Patients were told to smoke daily, even hourly. Some carried special cases marked for asthma use only, as if that made it healthier. The absurdity was hard to miss. Doctors encouraged patients with lung problems to inhale more smoke. It was the medical equivalent of curing thirst with salt water. Eventually, science caught up. Studies linked smoking to lung damage, heart disease, and cancer. The very products that promised relief were exposed as dangerous frauds. The asthma cigarette disappeared from shelves, replaced by inhalers and real medications. But the story doesn't end there. Some of the herbs used in those cigarettes, like atropine from belladonna, really do have medical uses in controlled doses. It wasn't all snake oil. It was just delivered in the worst possible way, wrapped in paper and set on fire. Today, the idea of smoking as medicine feels almost comedic, but for patients back then, it was deadly serious. They trusted their doctors, trusted the ads, and believed a glowing cigarette might hold the key to easier breathing. So the next time you hear someone say things were better in the old days, remember, those old days included being told to smoke for your health. And if cigarettes for asthma sound odd, just wait until you hear about the next medieval medicine. Because our ancestors once swore by a sticky black syrup called treacle, made with honey, herbs, and sometimes snake parts. Treatment number 13. Treacle, medieval antidote syrup. When you hear the word treacle, you probably think of something sweet and sticky. A syrup drizzled over bread or poured into pies. But in medieval medicine, treacle wasn't dessert. It was a bizarre antidote for poison, thick, strange, and sometimes packed with snake bits. Known as theriac in the ancient world, treacle was thought to be the ultimate cure-all. Doctors swore it could neutralize poisons, heal infections, and protect against the plague. The recipe called for dozens of ingredients: herbs, spices, honey, wine, opium, and sometimes powdered snake flesh. It was basically a medieval smoothie, if your blender included reptiles. The origins went back to ancient Greece, where theriac was first mixed as an antidote for snake bites. Over time, the recipe grew longer and stranger. By the Middle Ages, some versions had over 60 ingredients. Apothecaries treated it like an art form, grinding, mixing, and aging the concoction like fine wine. Imagine stepping into a 14th century pharmacy. Shelves are stacked with jars of dried herbs, roots, and spices. In the back, a giant cauldron simmers with honey and wine. The apothecary stirs carefully, then drops in a dried viper with a flourish. "Don't worry," he says, "the more snakes the better." Treacle was so prized that governments regulated its production. In Venice, pharmacists were required to prepare it publicly, under watchful eyes, to ensure no one cut corners. Crowds gathered to watch the great treacle-stirring ceremonies. It was half medicine, half theatre with a touch of snake soup. People used treacle for everything. Feeling feverish? Take a spoonful of bitten by a rat. Take 2. Worried about plague? Better drink it daily just in case. The more you took, the more protected you felt. And treacle wasn't cheap. It was considered luxury medicine, sold in little pots and jars. Nobles stocked it in their cabinets like treasure. If you had treacle, you weren't just prepared for illness, you were fashionable. Of course, whether it actually worked is another matter. With so many ingredients, some might have had mild effects. Opium calmed pain, honey soothed throats, herbs reduced swelling. But as an all-purpose antidote to poison, not so much. Still, belief was powerful, and treacle's reputation carried it through centuries. By the 18th century, scientists started raising eyebrows. They questioned whether a 60-ingredient snake syrup was really the best path to health. Gradually, treacle faded from medical practice, replaced by simpler, evidence-based remedies, though the name stuck around in cooking, where treacle finally became something you'd actually want to eat. So next time you drizzle golden syrup on your pancakes, remember, your ancestors used the same word for snake-flavoured medicine. Sweet or not, treacle's history is thick with strangeness. And if you thought swallowing snake syrup was bizarre, just wait. Because the next cure involved sticking an ice pick into your brain. Treatment number 14. Lobotomies. The brain is complicated, it controls our thoughts, moods and behaviours, and for much of the 20th century, when doctors couldn't fix those problems, they decided to stab the brain with an ice pick. Welcome to the age of lobotomies. The procedure was invented in the 1930s by Portuguese neurologist Antonio Egas Muniz. He believed that mental illness was caused by faulty connections in the brain, so the solution was to sever those connections. In theory, patients would be calmer, more manageable, less tormented by racing thoughts. The early surgeries involved drilling holes in the skull and cutting fibres in the frontal lobes. But things got even stranger in the United States. Dr. Walter Freeman popularised the ice pick lobotomy. He slid a sharp instrument, literally modelled after an ice pick, through the eye socket, tapped it with a hammer and swished it around. No operating room, no sterilisation, sometimes not even anaesthesia. It was brain surgery on a budget. Freeman travelled the country in his lobotomobile, performing thousands of these procedures. State hospitals lined up patients suffering from depression, schizophrenia, or even just unruly behaviour. In minutes they were treated. Families were told their loved ones would be calmer, happier, and easier to care for. And sometimes, at first, it seemed to work. Patients who had been violent became docile. Those who had been restless grew quiet. But the cost was enormous. Many were left with permanent brain damage, unable to care for themselves. Some died during the procedure. Others lived on, vacant, stripped of personality. Imagine being a patient in the 1940s. You're anxious, struggling, perhaps misdiagnosed. The doctor tells you there's a miracle cure. You lie back, a metal pick slides under your eyelid, and in moments your life is forever altered. The treatment was faster than boiling an egg, and about as delicate. For a while, lobotomies were hailed as a breakthrough. Newspapers praised Freeman as a pioneer. He even performed the procedure live, like a stage show, tapping his pick with a flourish. But gradually the dark truth spread. Stories of ruined lives, families shattered, and patients reduced to shadows of themselves began to dominate the headlines. By the 1950s, new psychiatric drugs like Thorazine arrived, offering safer alternatives. Lobotomies quickly fell out of favour, condemned as barbaric. Freeman himself was banned from performing surgery after too many patients died under his hand. Today, lobotomies are remembered as one of medicine's great horrors. They stand as a cautionary tale about rushing into treatments without understanding the risks. A reminder that just because you can poke the brain doesn't mean you should. So the next time you're stressed, take comfort in modern options, therapy, medication, mindfulness apps. Because your grandparents' generation might have been handed a hammer and an ice pick instead. And if an ice pick to the brain sounds extreme, just wait. Because the next odd treatment involved shocking yourself back to health with electricity. Treatment number 15. Electrotherapy gadgets. Electricity was new. It hummed, it glowed, it powered strange machines. And in the 19th century, people believed it could heal almost anything. So a wave of electrotherapy gadgets flooded the market, promising to shock you back to health. There were belts that buzzed your waistline, helmets that zapped your brain, and handheld devices that tingled your nerves. Advertisements promised cures for paralysis, depression, baldness, impotence, even wrinkles. If something was wrong with you, electricity could supposedly flip the switch. Imagine stepping into a Victorian parlour. The host invites you to try his new electrical belt. You strap it on, feel a sudden jolt and yelp. Everyone laughs and nods approvingly. Clearly the cure is working. After all, if you can feel it, it must be doing something. Some devices looked like ordinary household items. There were electric hairbrushes designed to stimulate follicles and fight baldness. Ladies could purchase electrified corsets to invigorate the organs. Men bought pocket-sized zappers for vital energy. It was less medicine and more carnival ride. And the instructions were always vague. Apply daily until symptoms improve. Which symptoms? All of them. Apparently a good zap could cure anything from indigestion to melancholy. Of course, a few forms of electrotherapy had real potential. Controlled electrical stimulation can ease pain or help muscles recover. But these Victorian gadgets weren't controlled. They were closer to strapping a car battery to your chest and hoping for the best. The craze spread fast. Catalogues sold devices by the thousands. Travelling salesmen demonstrated them at fairs. Doctors offered electric baths, where patients sat in charged chairs until their hair stood on end. Patients left tingling, dazed, and convinced they'd just purchased an extra decade of life. But not everyone was impressed. Critics called the machines quackery, warning they preyed on desperate people. Some unlucky users suffered burns, shocks, or worse. And gradually, as real medicine advanced, the glowing promises of electrical cure-alls fizzled out. Still, the fascination with electrotherapy never fully died. Even today we have TENS units, electric toothbrushes, and fancy face-zapping gadgets. The difference is that modern devices actually go through testing before they fry your eyebrows. So next time you charge your phone, be glad you don't also have to charge your medical belt. Because the Victorians lived in a world where every shock was marketed as a miracle. And if electricity seems like a sketchy cure-all, just wait. Because the next miracle medicine wasn't electric. It was slippery, bottled, and often fake. The world of snake oil. Treatment number 16. Snake oil. Few phrases in English carry as much suspicion as snake oil. Today, it means a scam, a fake, a cure that cures nothing. But once upon a time, snake oil was sold as real medicine, and people lined up to buy it. The story starts with Chinese labourers in the 19th century. They used real snake oil, made from the fat of the Chinese water snake, as a traditional remedy. It contained omega-3 fatty acids that genuinely reduced inflammation. Rubbed on sore muscles, it actually worked. But then came the American version. Salesmen on the frontier saw the demand and thought, "Perfect, we'll sell our own snake oil." Only problem, they didn't have Chinese water snakes. So they boiled rattlesnakes, lizards, or whatever creature they could find. Or sometimes just bottled mineral oil with a fancy label. Imagine the scene. A travelling wagon rolls into town painted with bold letters, "Miracle Snake Oil Elixir." A salesman jumps onto a crate waving a shiny bottle. Cures rheumatism, heals headaches, restores youth, step right up. The crowd cheers, coins clink, bottles sell out. And a week later, everyone realizes they've been sold flavored kerosene. Some snake oil salesmen were true performers. They hired bands to play music, actors to pose as satisfied customers, and assistants to plant fake testimonials in the crowd. It was less pharmacy and more Broadway show. Of course, when government inspectors finally tested the products, they found shocking results. Many bottles contained no snake at all. Some were just coloured water, turpentine or alcohol strong enough to make you forget your pain for a few hours. The only thing snake oil reliably cured was your money problem, by moving it from your pocket to the salesman's. The phrase snake oil became shorthand for medical fraud. By the early 20th century, it was a punchline in newspapers, a warning to avoid too good to be true cures, and eventually regulations tightened, forcing medicine to separate real science from carnival tricks. Yet there's an irony here. The original Chinese snake oil actually worked. It was only when the idea crossed the ocean and got twisted by opportunists that it turned into a scam. The myth swallowed the truth whole. Today, snake oil lives on as a phrase for everything from sketchy supplements to miracle diets. Anytime someone promises you health in a bottle with no side effects, you're hearing the echo of those wagons. So the next time you see an ad for a miracle detox tea, remember, you may not be sipping rattlesnake fat, but you're drinking from the same tradition of too good to be true. And if snake oil sounds outrageous, wait until you hear about goat testicles. Because one doctor in the 1920s claimed implanting them in men could restore youth and virility. Treatment number 17. Goat testicle implants. If you think modern wellness fads are wild, the 1920s took things to a whole new level. Because one American doctor promised eternal youth and virility by sewing goat testicles into men. His name was John R. Brinkley. A country doctor with questionable credentials, Brinkley built a medical empire on a single outrageous idea. He claimed that implanting goat glands into human patients would cure impotence, restore energy, and make men feel 20 years younger. It started with a farmer. The man complained of flagging energy and fading manhood. Brinkley looked at his herd of goats, noticed their boundless vigour, and had a eureka moment. If goats are so lively, he thought, why not share their spark? And so the first goat gland transplant was performed. Amazingly, the patient declared himself rejuvenated. Word spread fast. Suddenly, Brinkley's tiny Kansas clinic was flooded with men eager to borrow a little goatish energy. Brinkley happily obliged for a hefty fee. Imagine a 1920s waiting room. Middle-aged men sit nervously with hats in their laps. Goats bleat in the yard outside. Inside, Brinkley cheerfully explains how a quick surgery will make them young bucks again. The patients nod, wallets open, hope shining in their eyes. Of course, the science was non-existent. The implants didn't actually connect or function. At best, they sat uselessly inside the body. At worst, they caused infections, pain, or death. But Brinkley was a master showman. He published glowing testimonials, broadcast radio ads, and built a reputation as the doctor who could turn back time. His fame exploded. He made millions, built radio stations, and even ran for governor of Kansas, twice. His slogan, "A goat gland in every man." And though he lost the elections, he won enough votes to terrify the political establishment. For years, Brinkley lived like a king, performing thousands of surgeries. Wealthy men travelled from across the country to try his miracle. Some swore they felt revitalised, likely from placebo, or perhaps just the thrill of surviving surgery in a dusty clinic. Eventually, the medical establishment caught up. Investigations revealed Brinkley had no real qualifications. Reports of patient deaths piled up. By the 1930s, his license was revoked. He spent the rest of his life fighting lawsuits, his empire collapsing under the weight of fraud. But his legacy lingered. the story of goat gland implants remains one of the strangest chapters in medical history. Equal parts comedy, tragedy, and cautionary tale. Today, Brinkley is remembered as a con man with surgical tools, proof that desperation for youth can make people believe almost anything. Even that goat testicles are the key to immortality. So the next time you hear a too good to be true promise of restored vitality, remember the goats, and maybe stick to jogging and vegetables instead. And if goat glands sound strange, the next remedy goes in the opposite direction. Because some patients weren't swallowing animal parts, they were swallowing crushed emeralds and jewels. Treatment number 18. Powdered emeralds and gems. Jewels have always symbolized wealth, beauty, and power. But in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, they weren't just worn, they were eaten. Yes, people swallowed ground-up emeralds, rubies, and sapphires as medicine. The logic was simple. If gems were rare, radiant, and seemingly indestructible, surely they carried magical healing powers. Why settle for herbs when you could sip a little sparkle? Emeralds were thought to calm stomach troubles and prevent epilepsy. Diamonds were said to cure fatigue and drive away evil spirits. Sapphires soothed the eyes, while rubies gave energy and passion. It was like astrology meets pharmacy, with a dash of jewelry theft. Imagine a wealthy nobleman falling ill. His physician arrives not with herbs but with a tiny phial. He scrapes dust from a jewel, sprinkles it into wine, and hands it over. The nobleman drinks, grimaces at the grit, and declares he feels stronger already. The physician nods proudly, another successful prescription. Of course, only the wealthy could afford gem therapy. Poorer patients had to settle for cheaper remedies. But kings, queens, and aristocrats boasted entire cabinets of powdered jewels. Some even mixed the dust into elaborate antidotes against poison, convinced it could save them from assassins. The practice wasn't limited to Europe. In India and the Middle East, powdered gems appeared in Ayurvedic and Unani medicine. They were blended with herbs and honey, forming glittering tonics for vitality and longevity. A spoonful of sparkle was supposed to keep death at bay. But science tells a different story. Swallowing groundstones doesn't exactly heal you, it just scrapes your insides. In fact, jewel powders likely did more harm than good. At best, they passed through harmlessly. At worst, they caused internal damage. Still, patients swore by them. If you paid a fortune for a sparkling cure, you were going to believe it worked. After all, no one wanted to admit they'd just spent a diamond's worth of wealth on very expensive sand. By the 18th century, gem therapy faded as chemistry and medicine advanced. Doctors traded sapphires for microscopes, emeralds for experiments, and gradually people realized the jewels were better suited for crowns than for stomachs. Today we still talk about precious remedies, but usually in the form of vitamins or supplements, not gemstone smoothies. The only sparkle in your medicine cabinet now comes from glossy packaging, not crushed rubies. So the next time you admire a diamond ring, be grateful you don't have to drink it for your health, because nothing says bad investment like flushing a sapphire down your digestive tract. And if swallowing gemstones sounds indulgent, the next cure brings us back to Earth. Literally. Because on a battlefield, soldiers once disinfected wounds with vinegar and gunpowder. Treatment number 19. Vinegar and gunpowder. When you think of battlefield medicine, you probably picture bandages, stretchers, maybe a grim-faced surgeon. but for centuries one of the go-to remedies for wounds was a strange mix of vinegar and gunpowder. The logic was straightforward. Gunpowder was fiery and powerful. Vinegar was sharp and cleansing. Combine them, and you had a potion tough enough to battle infection. At least that was the theory. Soldiers often had little access to proper medicine, so when someone was cut, burned, or shot, the nearest comrade might sprinkle gunpowder directly into the wound. To dull the sting, or maybe just to feel productive, they'd then pour vinegar over it. The result was sizzling, stinging chaos. Imagine a camp after battle. A soldier lies groaning, his arms slashed open. The surgeon hurries over with a flask of vinegar and a pouch of powder. He sprinkles, he pours, and the patient screams as smoke curls from the wound. The surgeon nods confidently, saying, "Good, that means it's working." In some places, vinegar and gunpowder were even drunk as a tonic. It was believed the fiery mix could ward off plague or fortify the body. Because nothing says health like chugging salad dressing with explosives. Strangely enough, vinegar did have some mild antibacterial properties, and the alcohol sometimes mixed into gunpowder could have numbed pain. But overall, the treatment was more dramatic than effective. It likely caused more burns and infections than it cured. Still, the symbolism mattered. Gunpowder represented strength, courage, and victory. Vinegar represented sharpness and purity. Together they felt like a soldier's cure, fiery medicine for fiery men. The practice lingered into the 18th and even 19th centuries, long after better antiseptics were discovered. But eventually science won out. Doctors traded vinegar and powder for soap, bandages and disinfectants that actually worked. Today, vinegar belongs on French fries, and gunpowder belongs nowhere near your bloodstream. But for centuries, they were mixed together in the name of survival. So the next time you cut yourself, be grateful you can reach for antiseptic cream instead of your spice rack and the ammo pouch. And if vinegar and gunpowder sound extreme, the final treatment may top them all. Because plague doctors once filled their masks with bizarre potions, garlic, herbs, vinegar-soaked sponges, believing it would keep death itself away. Treatment number 20. Plague doctor potions. Few images from history are as eerie as the plague doctor. A long black cloak, a wide-brimmed hat, and that beaked mask staring like a bird of death. But the strangest part wasn't the outfit itself, it was what went inside the beak. During outbreaks of the Black Death, doctors believed disease spread through miasma, or bad air. If you could filter the air, you could protect yourself. So plague doctors stuffed their masks with herbs, spices and vinegar-soaked sponges. The beak became a portable pharmacy, a bizarre scented fortress against death. Recipes varied wildly. Some used garlic, rosemary and mint. Others preferred cloves, nutmeg and cinnamon. A few mixed in crushed flowers or juniper berries. One bold soul reportedly added dried toads. If it smelled strong enough to make your eyes water, it was considered effective. Imagine walking through a medieval street, bells tolling in the distance. Out of the fog strides a tall figure in black, their mask stuffed with lavender and vinegar. Children hide behind doorways. Adults cross themselves. The doctor moves steadily, smelling like a walking spice cabinet, convinced the stench of herbs will hold off the plague. The potions weren't just in masks. Plague remedies filled kitchens and apothecaries. People drank vinegar tonics, chewed garlic cloves and burned herbs in their homes. Some carried pomanders, little balls filled with scented herbs, to sniff whenever the air felt dangerous. If nothing else, the whole continent smelled like a confused salad. Of course, none of it worked. The plague was caused by bacteria carried by fleas on rats, not bad smells. But people didn't know that. And in desperate times, even a noseful of rosemary felt like a shield. Still, the symbolism mattered. The potions gave doctors and patients a sense of control, a ritual of protection in a world of chaos. And in a strange way, that comfort was a kind of medicine, not against the disease, but against despair. Today, the plague doctor mask is more costume than cure, a Halloween staple rather than hospital gear. But it reminds us of a time when survival depended on faith in garlic and vinegar, not antibiotics. A time when medicine was equal parts science, magic, and improvisation. So the next time you see that haunting beaked mask, think of the herbs stuffed inside. Not a real cure, but a desperate hope, because sometimes that's all medicine was, hope in a bottle, or in this case, a beak. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through the 20 oddest medical treatments in history. From arsenic tonics to radium water, from mummy dust to goat testicles, each cure tells the same story. How far people will go to find healing. Strange, sometimes deadly, sometimes oddly clever, and always deeply human. Treatment number 21. Trephination by ants. If you thought drilling holes in skulls was bad, wait until you hear about using ants as surgical tools. Yes, tiny insects pressed into service as doctors. This wasn't just folklore. In some parts of the world, ants were used to close wounds with their jaws, turning creepy crawlies into living stitches. Here's how it worked. If a warrior suffered a deep cut, the healer would grab a few large ants, usually soldier ants with big mandibles. The insects were placed along the wound. When they bit down, their jaws clamped the skin together. Then the healer twisted off the ants' bodies, leaving only the heads locked in place. Voila! Instant sutures. Imagine lying in the jungle after battle. You're bleeding, exhausted, half delirious. The healer crouches over you with a fistful of wriggling ants. One by one they snap into place, their heads clinging like staples. You wince, wondering if you'll survive the wound. Or just be remembered as the guy sewn shut by bugs. The method wasn't entirely foolish. Ant jaws are incredibly strong, clamping tight enough to hold flesh together. The technique worked like crude stitches, keeping wounds closed long enough for healing to start. And unlike sewing with dirty needles, ants were at least disposable. Some accounts even mention ants being used for emergency trephination, primitive skull surgery. Instead of drilling, sharp mandibles were used to cut away damaged tissue, which raises the question, who had the worst day, the patient or the ant drafted into brain duty? This practice appeared in various indigenous traditions across Africa, Asia and South America. It reflected human ingenuity. Use what's available, even if it's crawling on the ground. When you don't have sutures, why not try nature's stapler? Of course, the risks were huge. Ant bites hurt, their jaws weren't sterile, and infections were common. But in desperate situations, the choice was between bleeding out or trusting in bug dentistry. And let's be honest, it probably made for great stories around the fire. Warriors could brag, "See this scar? Ant stitched me back together." That's infinitely cooler than, "Yeah, I just went to urgent care." Today, the practice has been replaced by proper sutures and surgical glue, but the image remains unforgettable. Healers hunched over wounds, ants snapping into place, their bodies discarded like broken tools. So the next time you complain about a doctor using dissolvable stitches, remember, your ancestors might have had their wounds closed by bugs with bad attitudes. And if ant surgery sounds grim, the next treatment is even darker, because some people once believed the best way to heal was to touch the freshly executed body of a criminal. Treatment number 22. Corpse touch therapy. In the past, death wasn't just something to fear, it was something to rub on yourself for health. Enter corpse touch therapy, the belief that the freshly executed body of a criminal could cure your illness. From the Middle Ages into the 18th century, crowds gathered at public executions not just for spectacle, but for healing. If you had a goiter, epilepsy, or a tumour, you rushed to the scaffold. As soon as the condemned breathed their last, you reached out and touched the body. The life force of the dying criminal was thought to transfer into you, driving away your sickness. Imagine the scene. The gallows creaks, the crowd falls silent, the rope tightens, and as the body goes limp, a dozen villagers surge forward. Some press their necks against the corpse to shrink their goiters. Others rub their limbs against the still warm hands, desperate to cure paralysis. It was half healing ritual, half mosh pit. Doctors sometimes endorsed the practice. They argued that the violent, sudden death released a surge of energy, like lightning striking a tree. Touching the body at that moment supposedly let you absorb the spark. It was a grim form of recycling. The criminal's punishment became the patient's medicine. Epileptics were especially encouraged to seek corpse contact. People believed the shock of touching the hanged could reset the nervous system. Parents even brought their children to executions, lifting them up to brush against the body. It was less family day out, more macabre doctor's appointment. Of course, results were inconsistent. Some swore their swelling shrank or their seizures stopped. Others left disappointed or traumatized. But in desperate times, any chance at healing was worth elbowing through a crowd of mourners and pickpockets. The practice had a darker side too. Executioners were often bribed to let patients cut bits of hair, nails, or even flesh from the corpse. These souvenirs were ground into powders or worn as charms. The boundary between medicine and magic blurred until it all smelled faintly of superstition and bad hygiene. By the Enlightenment, critics began to push back. Scientists scoffed at the idea of corpse energy. Executions moved behind prison walls, away from eager patients. Slowly, corpse touch therapy faded into the past, though not before centuries of desperate rubbing. Today, it sounds like something from a horror story. But for our ancestors, it was just another remedy, tucked alongside leeches and powders. Proof that when medicine fails, people will reach for anything, even the hand of the recently departed. So the next time you're grateful for a modern prescription, remember, your ancestors might have had to sprint to a gallows to get their treatment. And if touching corpses feels grim, the next cure is just as strange, because it involved boiling up beaver testicles for tea. Treatment number 23. Beaver testicle tea. If you ever find yourself thinking modern health trends are weird, like kale smoothies or charcoal lemonade, remember this: our ancestors once brewed tea from beaver testicles. In medieval Europe, people believed powdered beaver parts could treat everything from fevers to headaches. Most importantly, they thought it worked as a contraceptive. So if you wanted to avoid pregnancy in the 14th century, you didn't buy herbs or devices. You boiled up beaver glands and drank the result. Part of the confusion came from castoreum, a strong-smelling substance secreted by beavers. It was used in perfumes, medicines, and sometimes food flavouring. People thought if the beaver's glands produced such powerful stuff, surely they must hold even greater medical magic. Imagine a physician in a candlelit room solemnly grinding dried beaver bits with a mortar and pestle. He sprinkles the powder into boiling water, stirs, and hands you the cup. "Drink this," he says. "It will ease your fever, clear your headache, and prevent unwanted children." You nod, sip politely, and try not to think about what's floating in your mug. The logic was tied to sympathetic magic. Beavers were famously prolific animals. If their reproductive organs were so potent, then surely consuming them would help. Or in this case, hinder human reproduction. It was biology by association, a medical theory that confused cause and effect. The remedy spread widely. Monks wrote recipes for it in medical texts. Midwives whispered about it to clients. And for centuries, people sincerely believed their reproductive health depended on sipping beaver tea. Did it work? Not really. Castoreum does contain certain chemicals, but nothing strong enough to function as reliable birth control. At best, patients just drank a very expensive, very unpleasant cup of swampy broth. At worst, it made them sick. Still, the placebo effect is powerful. If you believed beaver tea protected you, maybe you felt reassured enough to avoid worry. And in a world without alternatives, reassurance itself was valuable. Today, the idea of sipping beaver testicle tea sounds more like a prank than a prescription. But it shows how creative and desperate people could be when searching for cures. So the next time someone offers you an herbal detox tea, be grateful it doesn't come with a tail and teeth. And if beaver tea sounds bizarre, the next cure is even flashier, because some healers actually dissolved gold into drinks, believing molten metal could make you immortal. Treatment number 24. Molten gold elixirs. Gold has always fascinated people. It shines, it resists rust, it never tarnishes. So naturally alchemists and physicians once decided, if gold is eternal, maybe drinking it will make us eternal too. From ancient China to Renaissance Europe, molten gold elixirs were prescribed as tonics for strength, vitality, and even immortality. The logic was simple but dazzling. Gold is pure. Gold is incorruptible. If you swallow gold, maybe some of that purity will rub off on your insides. Of course there was a problem. You can't just crunch gold coins like potato chips. So healers dissolved it using dangerous chemicals like aqua regia, a mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acid. The result was a toxic brew of gold particles floating in corrosive liquid. Patients dutifully sipped it, convinced they were drinking bottled sunshine. Imagine a wealthy nobleman in his grand hall. A physician pours shimmering liquid into a goblet. The nobleman swirls it, admiring the sparkle. He drinks, wincing as it burns all the way down. His courtiers gasp at his bravery, and he announces through watery eyes that he already feels stronger. Some recipes were even more theatrical. Gold leaf was sprinkled into wine. Powdered gold was mixed into honey. In India, Ayurvedic practitioners prepared swana basma, ash of gold, believed to boost immunity and memory. It was medicine fit for kings, literally, since only the wealthy could afford to eat their jewellery. But while a little edible gold leaf is harmless, the chemical brews were another story. They poisoned patients slowly, damaging their organs. Instead of gaining immortality, drinkers often gained stomach cramps and shorter lifespans. That didn't stop the trend. Kings, popes, emperors all chased the glittering promise of eternal life. The drinks became status symbols, proof you were so rich you could casually sip precious metals. The dream of golden medicine lasted for centuries. It wasn't until chemistry advanced that people realized drinking dissolved treasure wasn't the secret to health. By then, countless fortunes had been swallowed, quite literally. Today, edible gold flakes show up in luxury cocktails and overpriced desserts, but now they're for bragging rights, not medical miracles. The only thing they cure is a craving for Instagram likes. So if you ever see someone drinking a golden latte, remember, it could be worse. At least they aren't gulping molten metal in the name of immortality. And if swallowing gold sounds extravagant, the next cure is far humbler, because it involved stuffing spider webs into wounds. Treatment number 25. Spider web bandages. Before band-aids, before gauze, before sterile strips, there were spider webs. Yes, in the ancient world, if you got a cut, someone might grab a stick, scoop up a clump of web and press it right onto your wound. The Greeks and Romans were especially fond of this method. They believed spider silk helped blood clot closed wounds and even prevented infection. Which sounds strange, until you realize spider webs are strong, sticky, and surprisingly absorbent. They're nature's duct tape. Picture a Roman soldier after battle. He staggers into camp, bleeding from a slash across his arm. The medic doesn't reach for bandages. Instead, he wanders over to a corner, collects a handful of cobwebs, and smears them across the gash. The soldier grimaces. The medic shrugs, and just like that, spiderweb bandaging is complete. It wasn't just battlefield improvisation. Spiderwebs were actually stored in jars by some healers, like rolls of gauze. They even added vinegar or honey for extra antiseptic power, creating the world's stickiest band-aid. And here's the surprising part: it might not have been complete nonsense. Spider silk is rich in vitamin K, which plays a role in clotting blood. So pressing webs onto a wound could help stop bleeding, at least temporarily. On the other hand, the webs were rarely sterile, so you might stop the bleeding only to introduce dirt, dead bugs, or a very confused spider. Still, spider web bandages were common for centuries. In some folk traditions, children were even told to chase spiders into jars, so the family always had a first aid kit at home. It was less fetch me a roll of gauze and more go catch me a tarantula. As medicine advanced, webs fell out of favour. Doctors realised cleanliness mattered more than sticky improvisation, and patients probably got tired of explaining why their arm looked like Halloween decorations. Today, spider silk is still studied by scientists for its strength, flexibility and potential in medical materials, but thankfully no one is scooping cobwebs off the ceiling and slapping them on wounds anymore. So the next time you grab a bandage, remember, your ancestors may have relied on a very patient spider to patch them up. And if cobwebs on wounds sound odd, the next cure leaps even further into the swamp, because in some places people trusted dried toads, worn around the neck or ground into powder, as medicine. Treatment number 26, toad amulets and powders. When it comes to strange cures, few creatures have been as unfairly volunteered as the toad. For centuries, healers swore that dried toads, or bits of them, could cure everything from seizures to toothaches. In medieval Europe, one popular treatment was the toad amulet. The process was simple but grim. Catch a toad, kill it, dry it, and then wear the body in a little pouch around your neck. It was believed to protect against fevers, cramps, and even the plague. Imagine walking through town jingling with coins, keys, and one very crispy amphibian. Other remedies involved grinding the toad into powder. Mixed with wine or broth, it was swallowed as a potion. Some recipes called for burning the toad to ash, then blowing the ash into a patient's mouth to ward off seizures. Because nothing says medical professionalism like spitting amphibian dust at your customers. Why toads? Partly because they seemed magical. Half in water, half on land, croaking mysteriously at night. And partly because of sympathetic magic. Toads were thought to absorb poisons. If you wore or ate part of one, maybe it would absorb your illness too. Of course, wearing or ingesting toads didn't actually cure anything. At best, the ritual gave patients a placebo sense of protection. At worst, they risked salmonella, poisoning, or just very bad breath. Still, toad cures were surprisingly widespread. Nobles wore jewel-encrusted amulets with dried toads inside. Peasants carried simple pouches. Some even placed live toads under sickbeds, hoping they'd draw out the disease as they squirmed. There's one recorded practice where a toad was strapped to a patient's throat to cure tonsillitis. When the toad eventually died, people assumed it had absorbed the illness. The patient, still sore-throated but now toad-scented, was told they were on the mend. Eventually, doctors dismissed the practice as superstition. Toads returned to ponds free to croak in peace. But for centuries they were unwilling partners in medicine, dangling from necklaces or swirling in stew. Today, toads have regained their dignity, though their old medical reputation lingers in folklore and fairy tales. Instead of curing fevers, they turn into princes, or at least into good bedtime stories. So the next time you see a toad, be grateful you live in a world where it's admired for its croak, not harvested for its spleen. And if toads sound bizarre, the next cure dives even deeper into the ocean. Because healers once prized whale vomit, ambergris, as a medicine and aphrodisiac. Treatment number 27. Whale vomit remedies. Some medicines are bitter, some are sour, and some are, well, whale vomit. Yes, for centuries people prescribed ambergris, a waxy substance that forms in the intestines of sperm whales, as a cure for everything from headaches to heart problems. Ambergris was mysterious stuff. It sometimes floated to shore, washed up in chunks that looked like pale rocks. It had a strange, sweet smell, and could be burned like incense or dissolved into drinks. Because of its rarity, people believed it must be valuable, and valuable things were always assumed to be healing. Doctors recommended ambergris for colds, migraines, epilepsy, and even the plague. Mixed with wine, it was said to warm the heart and soothe the brain. Ground into powders, it supposedly strengthened the body against weakness. In some places, men even used it as an aphrodisiac, convinced whale guts were the secret to romance. Imagine sitting in a medieval apothecary. The shelves are lined with herbs, spices, and jars of powders. The apothecary hands you a lump of waxy grey material. This, he declares, came from the belly of a sea monster. Grate it into your soup and your headaches will vanish. You stare at it, wondering if you're about to eat a candle made of ocean burps. Ambergris wasn't just medicine, it was luxury. Kings and nobles paid fortunes for it. It perfumed palaces, flavoured rare dishes, and symbolised wealth as much as health. A prince with ambergris in his pantry wasn't just rich, he was practically immortal. The funny thing is, ambergris did have some legitimate uses. Its chemical makeup allowed it to preserve scents, making it prized in perfume for centuries. But as medicine, it was mostly a glorified placebo. Drinking whale vomit didn't cure your plague, it just made you smell expensive. Still, the legend endured. For hundreds of years, ambergris was part of apothecary recipes across Europe, the Middle East and Asia. It was considered so valuable that shipwrecks carrying it were treasure troves. Finding a lump on the beach could make you rich enough to retire. Today, ambergris is still occasionally used in high-end perfumes, though synthetic substitutes have mostly replaced it. As medicine, it has thankfully been abandoned. Modern doctors don't reach for whale guts when you say you have a headache. So the next time you pop an aspirin, you'd be glad you don't have to swallow ocean wax harvested from a whale's digestive tract. Because if medicine is meant to comfort, whale vomit was more comedy than cure. And if swallowing whale spit sounds gross, the next treatment leaves marks you can still spot today. Because long before trendy spas, people practiced cupping with animal horns and fire. Treatment number 28. Cupping with horns. Today, cupping is a trendy spa treatment. Athletes show off round purple marks as proof they've been detoxed. But centuries ago, cupping was far less glamorous. Instead of sleek glass cups, healers used animal horns, and sometimes a bit of fire. The idea was simple. Illness was caused by bad humours or stagnant blood. If you could draw those impurities out through the skin, you could restore balance. And nothing said balance like suctioning your back with cow horns. Healers heated a horn over a flame, then pressed the wide end against the patient's skin. As the air inside cooled, it created suction. The skin puckered, blood pooled, and the patient groaned. If the healer was feeling extra dramatic, they'd prick the skin first, so the suction actually pulled out drops of blood. Imagine lying on a wooden table in a smoky hut. A healer hovers over you with a blazing torch in one hand and a goat horn in the other. He lights, he presses, and suddenly your back feels like it's being kissed by a very angry vacuum. You grit your teeth. The healer nods proudly, your bad humours are leaving. Cupping with horns was practiced in ancient Egypt, China, Greece, and across the Middle East. It was considered good for fevers, pain, lung problems, even melancholy of the spirit. Basically, if you had an ailment, someone was ready to slap a horn on you. And it left evidence. Historical illustrations show patients covered in spots like polka-dotted quilts. In some villages, those marks were worn like badges of health. If your back looked like a pepperoni pizza, you were clearly healing. To be fair, cupping does increase blood flow to the skin, which can sometimes ease muscle pain. But in its horn and fire version, it was closer to medieval barbecue than medicine. The risks of burns and infection often outweighed the benefits. Still, the practice survived. Even today, modern cupping is just a polished descendant of this ancient horn therapy. The difference is that now it happens in clean spas with glass cups, not smoky huts with goat horns. So the next time you see an Olympian with circular bruises, remember, they're taking part in a tradition that once involved livestock and open flames. And if cupping seems quirky, the next cure is even quirkier. Because some healers swore you could pull sickness out of your body by lighting a candle in your ear. Treatment number 29. Ear candling. Few medical treatments sound more like a prank than ear candling. The setup is simple. Stick a hollow candle in your ear, light it on fire, and wait while it supposedly sucks out wax and illness. Practitioners claimed the flame created a vacuum. As the candle burned, it pulled out earwax, toxins, and even negative energy. Afterward, they'd show you the waxy residue inside the candle as proof of what had been removed. Patients often gasped, convinced their ears had been harbouring small candles worth of gunk. In reality, most of that residue was melted candle, not your earwax. The supposed toxins were just charred debris. But the illusion was convincing enough to keep the practice alive for centuries. Imagine lying on your side in a darkened room. A friend carefully positions a hollow candle in your ear canal, strikes a match and lights it. The warm crackle fills your head and you feel oddly relaxed. You think, wow, I must be detoxing. Meanwhile, your other friend is in the corner quietly panicking because your head is literally on fire. Ear candling has roots in various folk traditions, from Native American practices to medieval European remedies. It was promoted as a cure for sinus infections, migraines, earaches, and spiritual imbalance. Some practitioners even insisted it could sharpen hearing and improve memory. But modern science is less impressed. Studies show the candle creates no real suction. At best, you get a warm, soothing sensation. At worst, you get burns, blocked ears, or melted wax dripping into your canal. Doctors today strongly advise against it, unless you like hospital visits. And yet ear candling refuses to die. Health spas still advertise it as a natural detox. New Age shops sell fancy kits with decorative candles, and the ritual has a calming vibe that keeps people coming back, even if the science doesn't hold up. So if you ever find yourself tempted to try ear candling, remember, you're basically paying to roast your head like a marshmallow, and that's one campfire story you don't need. And if fire in your ear sounds dangerous, the next cure takes us back underground. Because some healers once scraped moss from human skulls and prescribed it as medicine. Treatment number 30. Human skull moss. If you thought herbs from the garden were strange medicine, wait until you hear about moss from the graveyard. For centuries in Europe, healers actually scraped moss from human skulls and prescribed it as a cure. This moss, called usnea, grew on the bones of the long dead. Doctors believed it absorbed the essence of the skull itself. And since the head was the seat of life, the moss was thought to carry powerful healing properties. It was dried, powdered, and swallowed for epilepsy and nosebleeds. It was mixed into drinks for headaches. And it was pressed into wounds, because if it grew on a skull, surely it knew how to protect the body. Imagine visiting an apothecary in the 1600s. These shelves are filled with herbs and roots. Then, in the corner, a jar labelled moss from skull. The apothecary scoops some green dust, sprinkles it into a pouch and says, "Take this twice a day and you'll be right as rain." You stare at the powder, wondering if you're being cured or haunted. The moss was also used in charms. Carried in little bags, it was thought to protect against evil spirits and madness. Some parents even gave it to children during fevers, whispering prayers as they swallowed graveyard greenery. Strangely enough, moss does contain compounds with mild antibacterial qualities, so in rare cases it might have helped with wound healing. But the lack of cleanliness, and the fact that it was scraped off bones, probably caused more infections than it cured. The practice faded as medicine became more scientific, by the 18th century, graveyard moss was dismissed as superstition. Pharmacies stocked quinine and opium instead of powder from skulls. But in rural areas, the tradition lingered, carried by folk healers and whispered remedies. Today, it sounds like something from a Gothic novel, midnight figures in cloaks, creeping through graveyards with knives and jars, harvesting moss by lantern light. But for our ancestors, it was just another form of medicine, another desperate hope carved from the mysteries of death. So the next time you complain about the taste of cough syrup, be grateful you don't have to wash down powdered grave moss, because nothing says get well soon like swallowing a little piece of someone else's head. And with that we close our second batch of odd cures. From ants' stitches to skull moss as medicine, the creativity of past healers was boundless and often bizarre. Proof that humanity has always been willing to try anything in the quest for health, no matter how strange, smelly or downright spooky. Treatment number 31. Tobacco smoke enemas. Few treatments in history are as strange or as awkward as the tobacco smoke enema. Yes, for nearly 2 centuries doctors believed blowing smoke into a patient's rectum could cure everything from cholera to drowning. The practice took off in the 1700s. Europe had recently adopted tobacco brought from the New World, and people thought it was practically magical. It revived spirits, soothed nerves, and seemed to energize the body. So naturally someone thought, if smoking works for the mouth, why not try the other end? Riverside resuscitation kits were soon installed along the Thames in London. They included bellows, tubes, and a box of tobacco. If someone was pulled from the water, unconscious and gasping, rescuers would hurry to set up the kit. They'd insert the tube, pump tobacco smoke into the victim, and wait for signs of revival. Imagine the scene. You're a Londoner in 1780 strolling along the river. A man is pulled out, limp and pale. A bystander cries, "Quick! Fetch the kit!" You expect smelling salts or chest compressions. Instead, a rescuer kneels with a pipe, bellows furiously and declares, "Don't worry, he's inhaling it." Sort of. You stand there trying not to laugh or faint yourself. Doctors believed the smoke warmed the body, stimulated breathing, and dried out excessive moisture in the lungs. Some even claimed it balanced the humours, restoring health from the inside out. And patients, once conscious, probably felt a jolt of energy. Though whether from nicotine or embarrassment is debatable. The enema wasn't just for drowning. It was recommended for headaches, colds, cholera, typhoid, and even hernias. If you had an ailment, someone, somewhere, was ready to suggest smoke in your backside. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Satirists mocked the treatment in cartoons and pamphlets. The phrase, "blowing smoke up your," gained a new, very literal meaning, and as medical science advanced, the practice lost credibility. By the mid-1800s, tobacco smoke enemas faded, leaving behind only awkward stories and slang. Today the idea sounds absurd. We know tobacco is harmful, not healing. But for centuries it was cutting-edge medicine, proof that doctors would try almost anything to bring back the dead. So the next time someone tells you about a bizarre health fad, remember, at least it doesn't involve a pipe, bellows, and an awkward riverside revival. And if blowing smoke seems strange, the next treatment was even more toxic. Because for centuries doctors prescribed mercury as a cure-all, despite its tendency to rot teeth and drive patients mad. Treatment number 32. mercury pills and ointments. If there's one element that should never end up in your medicine cabinet, it's mercury. It's shiny, it's toxic, and it slowly destroys the body. But for centuries, mercury was one of the most popular cures in the world. Doctors prescribed mercury pills, ointments, and drinks for syphilis, constipation, melancholy, and just about anything else. They even injected it into sores or rubbed it directly onto the skin. The motto was simple: a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. It meant you might enjoy a fling, but syphilis and its toxic cure would stay with you forever. Why Mercury? Because it was dramatic. Patients who took it sweated, salivated, and sometimes vomited. To doctors, that looked like proof the treatment was driving out the disease. To patients, it often felt like proof they were dying. Imagine a 16th century apothecary. A man with syphilis stumbles in, desperate for relief. The apothecary mixes a paste of mercury and animal fat, hands it over and says, "Rub this on your sores nightly." The man nods, goes home, and within days his gums are bleeding, his teeth are loose, and he drools constantly. The doctor declares, "Excellent, the cure is working." Mercury was even used as a laxative. Swallowing little blue pills of mercury chloride sent patients rushing to the chamber pot. That was taken as proof it was cleansing the system. In reality, it was poisoning the intestines. The effects were gruesome. Long-term use led to tremors, madness, and organ failure. Victims shook uncontrollably, a condition so common it was called the trembles. Some lost their teeth, others their memories. And still, doctors prescribed it, convinced the suffering meant progress. Mercury ointments also smelled terrible, earning patients the nickname the unclean. Yet for lack of alternatives, many endured it. The choice was often syphilis or slow poisoning. Neither option was great, but mercury at least gave the illusion of treatment. By the 19th century, critics began to push back. Doctors like Sir William Osler warned that mercury did more harm than good. But it took decades before safer treatments replaced it. Even then, mercury lingered in some medicines well into the 20th century. Today, mercury is safely locked away in thermometers and science labs, not in ointments for rashes. But its long history reminds us how often medicine confused dramatic effect with actual cure. So the next time you complain about the side effects of modern medicine, remember, at least your prescription doesn't involve drooling uncontrollably until your teeth fall out. And if mercury sounds toxic, the next treatment gets even messier, because in ancient Egypt some women relied on crocodile dung as birth control. Treatment number 33. Crocodile dung contraceptives. When it comes to birth control, history is full of creative, if questionable ideas, but few are as eyebrow-raising as ancient Egypt's method. Crocodile dung mixed with honey, used as a contraceptive. The recipe appears in medical papyri dating back nearly 4,000 years. Women were instructed to collect the dung, shape it into a paste, and insert it as a pessary before intercourse. It was believed to block or neutralize semen, acting as a natural barrier. Imagine the scene along the Nile. A woman sits with a clay pot, carefully mixing honey and crocodile droppings. Her neighbour peeks over and asks, "What are you making?" She replies casually, "Oh, just tonight's contraception." The neighbour nods politely as if that's the most normal thing in the world. The logic, strange as it sounds, wasn't completely irrational. Dung is alkaline, and semen needs an acidic environment to survive. So perhaps the Egyptians thought the mixture would chemically hinder conception, The honey, sticky and thick, may have acted as a seal. In theory, it had potential. In practice, it was unsanitary and probably caused more infections than prevention. Other cultures tried similar ideas. In India, elephant dung was sometimes used. In medieval Europe, animal fat mixed with herbs served the same purpose. Clearly, humans were determined to improvise, no matter how questionable the ingredients. Crocodile dung contraceptives became a symbol of ancient ingenuity. They reveal how resourceful and desperate people were to control fertility. But they also remind us how far medicine has advanced. Because while modern methods may come with side effects, at least they don't involve wildlife droppings. The practice eventually faded as other contraceptives emerged: sponges, herbal mixtures, and eventually mechanical devices. But the image lingers: Egyptian women trusting crocodiles not just for religious symbolism, but for family planning. Today, the story survives mostly as a curiosity. It's often retold with equal parts amusement and disbelief. Proof that sometimes medicine is closer to comedy than science. So the next time you grumble about modern contraceptive commercials, be glad you don't have to shop for honey and crocodile droppings at the pharmacy. And if dung as medicine sounds bad, the next cure glowed in the dark. Because in the early 20th century, people rubbed radium-laced creams on their faces, believing radioactive youth came in a jar.